Well, thank you so much, Erica, for this nice introduction. And thank you for inviting me. I love this idea when I heard about it the first time to celebrate female theosophists. I have done research about several of them, and I'm very honored to talk today about two of my favorite female theosophists. There are quite a few, but I wanted to start because I'm a woman, right? And I was always impressed with the impact that Helena Blavatsky had on not only the theosophical movements, but the effect that she had on women, right? Because she was the first woman that had such a presence in a male-dominated field. And that encouraged other women, right? She paved the way for women as no one else had before. And that stays with me always. And so, because of that, she um, attracted very impressive women who have then spread the theosophical ideas. So the two women I wanted to introduce today, Mary Gebhard and Clara Margaret Akkad. Now, I'm going to start with Mary Gebhard, the reason being that she was actually a contemporary of Madame Blavatsky, and Clara Cott was a contemporary of Annie Besant and Leadbeater. So she was born in Dublin as Mary Lestrange. She was the only daughter of the British major Thomas Lestrange. Um, which was interesting because he belonged to the Protestant branch of this old family, and then he decided to marry a Catholic Irish lady, Sarah Egan, which strained tremendously the relations with his family, and for that reason, Mary never met any relatives on her father's side. I'm sure that made a deep impression on her. Eventually, they moved to Paris and she was educated at the Sacré-Cœur. She was presented at the court, as it was usual back then. And then, when her father lost his property, he left for Montreal, for Canada. And but then what happened is when he passed away in 1850, the mother decided to move to the US with her daughter. And that's where a big event happened because she met Gustav Gebhard in New York. And he was a businessman, and that was actually his first trip to New York. And they met. And then she married on September 4th, 1852, in New York. And to show, I guess, respect to both religions, the ceremony was in Catholic and Protestant rites. And then they settled in Elberfeld in Germany. And together they had 7 children. And you can see here a photo of the old times in Elberfeld. So it cannot have been easy, right? Because it was a small town and her husband traveled a lot. And she had this inner urge to find out more about philosophical and occult subjects. And so she studied actually Hebrew with a clergyman and really wanted to prepare herself to dive into the Kabbalah. And eventually she met Eliphas Levi. Another name he's known for him is Abbe Alphonse Louis Constant. His birth name was Louis Constant. He is very well known through occult works, and she was his pupil until his death. Now, as a theosophist, I think we also should know a lot about Eliphas Levi. The reason being, I believe he was born in 1810 and passed away in 1875. But his concept of the astral light was adopted by Helena Blavatsky, and it doesn't matter if it's Isis Unveiled or The Secret Doctrine, she mentions his name a lot. But this is what Mary Gebhard said about him. She said, I found in him what I have never met in any other individual since, a profound knowledge on occult subjects. I believe there was not a book on mysticism that he had not read. She also said one could sit for hours listening to his eloquent discourses on the occult side of nature. And never did I leave his presence without feeling that my own nature had been uplifted to nobler and better things. So she actually visited Eliphas Levi several times in Paris, and Eliphas Levi visited the family twice. So eventually, and by the way, if you want to find out more about Eliphas Levi, we have this Theosophical wiki, and there's information about him, and also the connection about Theosophy on our wiki. So when he died, she needed to find another source, right? She wanted to know and learn more. So then eventually she heard of the Theosophical Society, and an exchange of letters followed with Colonel Olcott, and eventually she became a member of the society on February 19th, 1883. So Sinnett met Mary Gebhard, and he must have been very impressed because he did write a letter in 1883 to Master K.H. about her. And he said, Madame Gebhard is a person of the most indomitably steadfast nature, but she will have to go back now to Germany. Would you wish her to attempt the establishment of a T.S. Lodge at Elberfeld? Or is it not worthwhile to multiply branches with ladies at their head? Now we can hear this patriarch approach and the way of thinking back then. And then he said, though Madame Gebhard seems to us to have the making of a tried cella in her. So Master Kudhomi did write about her. So if you look at the Mahatma letters, this one was in number 117. Hers is a genuine, sterling nature. She's a born occultist in her intuitions. And I have made a few experiments with her, though it is rather Master M's duty than my own. So, but she must have gotten the message, and she decided with her family, who was also very interested in theosophy, actually, to create or found the Germania Theosophical Society. And it happened at her home. She was elected vice president, and Colonel Olcott was present when this happened. And the head back then, the president, was Dr. William Hoepfl-Wellenhofer, and all members of the Gebhard family, except the daughter, joined the Theosophical Society then. And this is something from the old diary leaves that Henry Olcott wrote about Mary Gebhard. He said, a sweeter or more loyal character I never met. She was one of those women who shed about them an atmosphere of love and virtue, fill their homes with sunshine, make themselves indispensable to their husbands and adored by their children. Frau Gebhard possessed for her colleagues in the TS the special attraction of being a born mystic, and for many years a student of the occult, so far as her family duties allowed. So we can hear that there was really a lot of respect of other theosophists, of Olcott, of Sinnett, and the masters as well. So her husband, he was a consul, and he owned a manufacturing enterprise with a presence in the US. And he had a son, Arthur, who was also interested in theosophy, and he managed this branch in the US. And Arthur, together with William Kwanjaj, who was one of the three founders of the Theosophical Society, together with Colonel Olcott and Helena Blavatsky, they founded the Theosophical journal, The Path, in New York in April of 1886. So every time I do research about anyone and give a talk, I look for a characteristic, something that really speaks to me and that I love about this person. And this is something that might not seem important nowadays anymore, right? But back then there was no TV, we didn't have any Zoom meetings or whatever. She was an absolutely wonderful hostess. And I guess her home must have been large, and so she had often guests. For example, Helena Blavatsky and her party arrived in Eberfeld on August 17th, 1884, and they stayed there for 2 months. Can you imagine? So her home was always the center of theosophical activities. She had lots of visitors, and even from abroad. Among the theosophists that were Dr. Franz Hartmann, right? And then Francesca Arundel, and also Constanze Wachtmeister, another one of my very beloved female theosophists. So Helena Blavatsky stayed again with the Gebhards in May and June of 1886. So she was extremely dynamic, but she was refined. She was cultured, and she had this talent and the urge for occult studies. So she was a very faithful worker for many years. And she was one of the few who did receive letters from the masters. And she even saw the astral form of Master Moria once. This was probably performed at the time when some important work was done on their behalf. So here's an excerpt from a letter that Master Moria wrote to her. We are drawn, lady, into the vortex of the destiny prepared previously by ourselves for ourselves, as the ship in the maelstrom. You now begin to realize this. What shall you do? You cannot successfully resist fate. Are you ready to do your part in the great work of philanthropy? You have offered yourself for the Red Cross, but sister, there are sicknesses and wounds of the soul that no surgeon's art can cure. Shall you help us teach mankind that the soul sick must heal themselves? Your action will be your response. So I think this is a very interesting advice, because she clearly wanted to be of service to humanity, but he felt it was more important to do the work to help people with their soul's purpose, and not the practical thing like the Red Cross. So this is a letter from Master K.H. to Mary from September 1884. He writes, the germs that you have been nursing in your innermost heart for 30 years are now rapidly ripening. The harvest time is come. Thus is your hour of opportunity and your crisis. Falter not, sister, when the goal is in sight, else you will lose much that you have gained. The guests who have thronged you to your house and burdened you with trouble and anxiety were gathered here by us for a purpose, and it will be accomplished. A flood of light, of the sunlight of theosophy, has entered your house through the physical and moral gloom of Elberfeld. Keep it shining on the mirror of your soul, sister, wherein you gaze to scan the future. Blessings and thanks, KH. I love this letter. It's so poetic and probably touched her heart. Um, and I think one of the things is that they knew probably that the crisis was coming. She had so her youngest two sons, Herman and Walter, were identical twins, and they both committed suicide. One in 1881 and one in 1885. And we don't know why these tragedies happen, but we always have to remember the growth of the soul. So there was a reason behind what this happened. And she transitioned on December 15th, 1892 in Berlin. So one thing I wanted to share. So when HPB was working on The Secret Doctrine, when she was very severely ill and was in Würzburg, she came to visit her and helped her. So she never wrote a book, like we will find out about Clara Cott, who was, an author very well known. But you can do research, and there are letters that you can find even online that HPB and Mary Gebhard exchanged. But when I did my research, I found this historical marker database from Würzburg, and the last line translated is worked here in 1885, 1886 on the secret doctrine. So I thought that was neat. And so now let's go to Clara Cott. She was an English theosophist. She's known for her work as a feminist, as a lecturer, a teacher, and writer. She served as the general secretary of both the Australian and South African sections of the Theosophical Society. And during a theosophical career of nearly 70 years, she traveled to 5 continents. Very impressive. Her life was very different than Mary Gebhard's, because Mary Gebhard was a householder, right? She had been married and she had children. This was not the case with Clara Cott. So she was born on October 10th in 1876 at Barnstable, Devon in England. She was the oldest of 10 daughters. And her parents were Henry L. Cott, an inspector of schools for Cornwall and part of Devon, and Clara Cott, a half-Italian beauty. So the daughters were educated by a series of governesses, went to plays and concert, learned to sing and play the violin and piano. Now, Clara was very shy and sensitive, but her dad had an extensive library, and so she read a lot of books there. And some of the works that she found meaningful were from Sir Walter Scott and Thomas Carlyle. And so I guess there's a band or something called The Living Dead. And there's another book, I think from 1829, called The Realm of the Living Dead. I have not been able to find that particular book. Must have been written in the 19th century. But it was a book that was important to Clara Cott, because even as a child, she questioned the meaning of life. And she had this inner urge to search for something, right? And she had a religious training, of course, and she attended the local Church of England parish churches, and she had to memorize passages of scripture. But then when she read this spiritualist book called The Living Dead, she was relieved of her childhood fears of hell and embraced the concept of life after death, which became, because during the time when she lived, so important. We'll see that later. So anyhow, in 1901, her father died. And then the family moved to Geneva, Switzerland. And Clara tried to really help her mother, because it cannot have been easy. And so she worked wherever she could. Now, I am born in Austria, right? In Graz. So it was so neat for me to find out that it was an Austrian neighbor, Madame von Pachten, who actually introduced her to Theosophy, because she invited Clara and to attend concerts with her and to go to other meetings with her to broaden her horizon. But and in the end, she took her to theosophical lectures. And then when the family moved back to England, to Bath, she decided to attend theosophical lectures. And then she heard once a talk by Colonel Olcott, who described the adepts, the masters. And that changed her life irrevocably from that moment on. So, this is a book that you can, by the way, find online. Uh, um, it's called So Rich a Life. And I remember years ago, the former president of the Theosophical Society in the US, Betty Bland, she recommended the book to me and she said, I should read it because I will love it. And she was right. And so a lot of information I have actually from that book. So she joined the Theosophical Society, the French section, in December 1903. And she met Annie Besant in person. And then her mother and her sisters, except for one, also got interested in theosophy. And then eventually, she was asked to give her first talk. Now, she was insecure, and as I said before, she was shy, and she doubted her ability, but then she was honored to work for a sacred cause, and she took on that challenge. Um, Now, there, there was an interesting part in her life. So she was an ardent socialist and had a strong sense for freedom and justice. And so she decided to help steward meetings with suffragettes. And they had weekly meetings, and she was there to answer questions. She gave lectures, she distributed literature. And this group of women decided to disrupt the speeches by politicians. And then eventually they planned something in London, and they planned a raid on the well-guarded House of Commons. But what happened is she and others were arrested and sent to Holloway Gaol for a month. And that was a frightening experience. She writes about this in her autobiography. And then the women were released after a month, and she was offered a position as an organizer for the union. But then at that point, she decided, no, I'm not going to dedicate my life to politics. I am going to dedicate it to theosophy. So she was actually the first national lecturer for the English section. And here we see how important donations can be, right? So because in 1906, she had an annual salary of £50 that was provided by a wealthy member from Birmingham. But then eventually the funds ran out. So she became a librarian. And here we see, or at least that's how it was for me when I found out more about her. We see how she was like adaptable, right? She just, okay, there's no money. I can't be a lecturer. I'm going to be a librarian now. And then again, later on, she was a lecturer. And the audiences responded very well to her. They responded to her humanity, and she was inspirational. And then eventually, she was became in demand across five continents. And here's a quote I found from somebody who attended her lecture. She said, she just chatted away as if we were all sitting around the fireside. No other speaker I know of has ever achieved such intimacy and closeness with those who listened to her. Each felt as if receiving a very personal message. She always stood on the platform, a very slim and erect figure in a long black dress. So then eventually she visited Ardea, and in the book she describes the estate, the Leadbeater chambers, her daily life in wonderful detail. She She participated fully in Ardea and she gave lectures. I think she was, if I remember correctly, she was encouraged really by Annie Besant. And because she was encouraged and did it, more and more often, she developed very strong skills. And she writes about Annie Besant. So this is what she said. I remember many little things about her, her sweetness to little children, her cheerful willingness to help in all we did. And she also said it was the spirit of an ancient martyr. Um, this is one of the reasons I love to read biographies or autobiographies to also find out more about other, other people, but in this case, Theosophists. And this is one quote she shared that she found very impressive and that I found always very helpful because Annie Besant said, when I look back over a very long life full of sorrows, I would now willingly forgo all my joys, but not one of my sorrows, for I learned the most through them. I think this is such a strong statement, and hopefully it helps people who go through challenging times, right? And when she said, when you can be just as happy when the one you love best is not here, then you have learned how to truly love. She also describes Krishnamurti, right? And he was very young during that time. He was discovered. He was the rising star. And this is what she said about him. She said, there was never a less egoistic person than Krishna. How spoiled he might have been with all the adulation poured at his feet. And yet I have never seen him anything but modest and kind. And she saw him in Adyar, in Oman, in London, the US, and in Australia. And the reason why she shared this in his book, because there were two meetings of his that the most wonderful events of all my life took place. Basically, there were mystical experiences that she had. The first one was an event where Krishnamurti was asked to hand out certificates of membership. And you know how it is when, people are in a group and it's a larger group and then there's some chatter. And she said, suddenly I heard this inner voice. He said, cease talking and attend. And she said, it felt like an invisible host surrounded the hall and the atmosphere deepened. It was like love became tangible. And suddenly she saw that some people who he handed the certificates to did devotional salutations. But what she noticed is these vibrations stayed with her. They lasted days. And that she felt like she was lifted up into a vast interior consciousness in which she saw two things very clearly. A feeling that the whole world had been present with us, and everyone was equally loved. There was no sense of difference, even though difference exists. And the second event happened after Krishnaya had dissolved the Order of the Star in the East. And that took place in Oman. And Krishnamurti said, I come not to destroy, but to fulfill. If you would tread the path that I have trodden, then you must learn to love as I love, to understand as I understand. I come to those who love and to those who suffer. This statement stayed with her whole life. And it made her understand that if we love or suffer, it means we are alive. Now, She worked as a lecturer and not as a nurse. And now this is interesting because I also think that it was this understanding that it would be better to help people who have who are suffering or who want to find their soul's purpose than working as a nurse. And she received £1,000 from a wealthy American. And this next statement was extremely helpful to me. I lost my younger son to natural causes he was 28 um, at the end of 2022. And what she was sharing is, so there were a lot of women trying to help and doing things. And there was this one woman who just was so depressed. And you could see it in the way she spoke in her physical posture, because she had lost her son in World War One. And then eventually one day she saw her and she had more energy and she was in good spirits. And she said to her, what happened? And she said that one night, she would cry a lot or whatever. And then one night, suddenly she saw at the end of the bed a light. And then in that light, she saw her son's head. And then just, the upper part, like the shoulders. And he said to her, "Now, mother, listen to me. I have got someone to help me to do this, and I shall never be able to do it again. I want you to realize that I'm well and happily occupied and not far from you. Pull yourself together, mother dear, and cease to grieve." What a powerful statement. And it helped because it changed her attitude towards his death. So then she was asked to go to Australia and New Zealand, and so she stayed at the Manor. This was the Theosophical community beginning in 1922, and anybody who has done research about Dora van Gelder or Bishop Leadbeater, this was where they stayed, and it was important. An important time. She lectured around Australia, and she was also traveling through New Zealand for 6 months. And here is another interesting story. You see, a lot of people after World War One, they were suffering. Women had lost their husbands or their brothers or their fathers or their sons. And so this topic about life after death was very important for many people. And so there was a radio station, 2GB. So, and here, let me read this first. She said, "By this time, we had the most flourishing radio station in Australia. The government owned the first-class stations, but private owners were allowed to hold what were called B-class stations. We had the most famous of all, Station 2GB. These letters stood for Giordano Bruno, a past incarnation of Dr. Besant. And under the leadership of one of our members who proved a genius in this respect, our station rose so high in public esteem that we could charge £1 a minute for advertisers." What a wonderful story. By the way, if you want to find out more about Giordano Bruno and this connection with Theosophy, you can find something about him on the Theosophical Wiki as well. So before I share this other story that has to do with the woman that I found so interesting, she shared her opinion about Leadbeater. She said, "Perhaps one of his most outstanding characteristics was his clear absence of any wish to impress anyone. I never met a man who so clearly, honestly, and simply did not mind what other people thought." And she also said, "No one else in all the world could make the adepts so real and living to us as he could. He often told us stories about them." So anyhow, as I said before, I got ahead of myself, sorry. This was, again, she talked a lot about life after death because people were suffering. And then she got I believe it was a letter from a woman who had listened to her lecture on the radio station. And she said that her husband had transitioned, right? He has died. And she was devastated. And that he actually visited her for 3 weeks after his death. So she was able to see him, and there was this connection left, right? And then one night he said, "This is the last time I can come, as I must now go on to a higher plane out of touch with Earth. But I want to tell you that a very dear old friend is coming out here from Scotland. You will meet him, and he will fall in love with you. I wish you to marry him because he will make you such a good husband." And the woman had written, it had happened, right? He came, he had visited, and she had been married at that time with her, with this man from Scotland for some time. So, of course, she was also active in North America. This is a photo, and she's here in the center. This is Clara. And so she visited 13 Midwestern cities and gave lectures. She attended the Third World Congress. She visited lodges and federations nationwide. But she also had a family, and so she visited her niece, friends, and the convention and the summer school, right? And she attended the annual convention in Chicago and went to Crotona for almost a year. And then South Africa. Well, it wasn't meant to be that long, but life happens and we have to adjust. So, because of World War II, she basically stayed there longer than intended. So she writes about this in her autobiography, that it was an interesting experience because there was a new type of audience. There was no white working class there. She, in fact, served as national president and general secretary of the section for 5 years. She was asked to, and she accepted. She took on whatever was asked of her, whatever came along. She did what was needed. She said she loved the farm life, the freedom and the unconventionality, and she said she loved the climate. She did share in her book that she did feel sorry for the natives, right? But she also said that South America, the theosophy in South America, is very alive. Now, she contributed significantly to theosophical literature. So if you look at the Union Index of Theosophical Periodicals, there are 466 articles by or about her. She edited the Link. This was the journal of the South African section, and also wrote a regular column called The Inner Life in the journals of the American section. She also published many books and booklets. And I mention here two, it's the technique of the spiritual life and trust yourself to life. Now, it sounds odd, the technique of the spiritual life, but it's a very good book. And Maria Parisen, who just retired as the person who was responsible for the education at Crotona, she created years ago a beautiful course based on this book. And then Pablo Senda also did a series of lectures based on this book. And then I think about 2 years ago, he asked me to take those lectures and create an online course. So we have an online school, as you probably know, and all the courses are for free of course, we ask for donations, but there's a lot of information, and everybody can take the lectures and at their own pace. And I was just recently in Adia, and so there at the bookstore was another book. It's called Theosophy as the Masters See It, by Clara. And it's not as well known, but I'm reading it. I really love it. For example, because she picks out these quotes from the Mahatma letters. And currently, I'm reading about the lodge work and what they recommended and suggested for lodge work. So, and when you read her books, you just know that she had this deep understanding of theosophical teachings, and studied the Mahatma letters. I love the Mahatma letters, and I'm at my second time that I'm going over them, and our lodge eventually, when we're done with the secret doctrine, are going to study those. So she's very, very impressive. So these were the last years, and so at the fifth Fall Congress at the Theosophical Society, Adia, in Salzburg, in Austria, was the last public appearance of Miss Cott. Now, I found that interesting. As I mentioned before, I was born in Austria. She was led to Theosophy by an Austrian, and her last lecture that she ever gave was in Austria. So, and according to Joy Mills, that's what she said. She said, no one who attended that Congress at Salzburg will ever forget the lecture our beloved Clara gave there. It was, she said, her farewell lecture. But although she was in her 90th year, he spoke with all the vigor and dynamic vibrancy of the eternally young. The standing ovation that followed her talk was the spontaneous tribute of the members to the gallant soldier who never swerved from the vow she had taken on entering the society to use every talent and capacity in the service of humanity. Her final years were spent at Way's End in Camberley in England, and then she died peacefully on April 3rd, 1971. And the entire October 1976 issue of the Theosophist was devoted to articles about her. So I thought I would share this. So Richer Life is the name of her autobiography. And as I said, you can find it for free online. She said, I don't believe in isms. There is something good in all of them. And human kindness and common sense could take what is good from all. For the sake of a rising world consciousness already united physically by wireless waves and commerce, we must become world citizens and some form of cooperative living, both within the bounds of a nation and internationally, must come. Now, I also am doing astrology, teach astrology, beginners courses, and have some clients, and read all the time about astrology. And it's not only the Aquarian age, but Pluto has last year, at the end of last year, finally entered for good Aquarius. And Aquarius stands for, human service, for progress in humanity, also for groups and friends and group work, and also less for hierarchy and more for, this teamwork. And so this statement spoke to me a lot. Now, it's like when I went I was also in Mumbai, visited the Blavatsky Lodge, but there's Elephanta Caves in Mumbai when you take a ferry, and there's all these impressive figurines of Shiva. And, it reminded me also now as Erica said at the beginning, there's so much unrest and so much bad things happening in the world right now. But I guess knowing theosophy or trying to live by based on theosophical teachings, at least it helps me to take this step back and say there has to be chaos first, like Shiva, the Lord of Shiva, the destroyer, before something new can be built. And as she said, it must come. It will happen, except that Pluto is transiting Aquarius for around 20 years. So it's a long time. She also said there's only one power in all the universe that ever did or ever will save man, love, and sacrifice. The greed for comfort and power may overlay it, but those imponderables are eternal and cannot be lost, though they may remain hidden for lack of speech. John Algeo, who was the president of the Theosophical Society here in the US from 1993 till 2002, he wrote something nice about Clara. He said, for a teenage novice, Clara was not a person one knew, but an icon, one venerated. To be in her presence was to receive the sort of grace called darshan in the Hindu tradition. But she was an unusual sort of icon because she was so unpretentious and so comfortably homey. She seemed to be a kindly, typically British nanny who wanted to be sure that her charges did what was best for them, while enjoying themselves in the process. She was an old dear, but a somewhat mysterious and quite marvelous old dear, whose given name was an apt one, for Clara means bright and shining, but also renowned and distinguished. And as I said, whenever I do research about somebody, I'm looking for this quality that impresses me so much about that person. And what impressed me was Clara. She was unpretentious and multi-talented. She was amazing. And with that, I end my talk for today. And I hope you find those two women as inspiring